Let's see, where was the story? Give me a second. Oh yeah, no, it's my lead story today. That's the first one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have Chris Cole of Victims of Family Law joining us for our first headline today. How you doing, Chris?
I'm great. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. All right, so this headline, it's I'm really grateful that you could join us for this in particular because I feel like you are, if not warning us about this, you are showing us the premonitions of this very early on in the crisis, discussing how some parents were being denied access to their children because in joint custody situations, if either parent had a higher standard of COVID protection, they could say that, well, if our kid goes to stay with you, then you're exposing me to and them to a lower standard of COVID protection than I would want. Is that a fair way of describing it, Chris?
Absolutely. I mean, basically, what they've done is taken a parent who might be skeptical or doesn't believe in this threat the way the propagandized media and everybody has sold it as, and they're basically telling you if you're a good or bad parent based on your belief of safety. So,
How much you
one
agree with
parent.
authorities? No, 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 no. This is a bigger point. Like you might want to turn this into some kind of bumper sticker for BFL. The state says your value as a parent is based on how much you agree with them.
Yeah, hold on. I'm having some audio issues. I'm going to log out and come right back on.
All right. Well, you're sounding clear for me. I guess there's a little interference from my end, but this is a really important point here, and I'm grateful for Chris's work in having brought this to my attention. But like victims of family law is a really a beautiful inclusive term for anybody who's been through a bad divorce, and not even a bad divorce, a divorce that was made worse by government involvement, right? Anybody who's been a child of divorce, anybody who's had their kids threatened to be taken from them because their neighbor saw them smoking pot or they had some kind of criminal record. Uh, but now with Corona being applied to this, it really is in stark clarity that your value is a is is evaluated. Your value as a parent is based on how much you agree with the authorities. And now this new, okay, so we're going to bring Chris on after I introduce the story here. This is from sunsentinel.com. The Sun Sentinel. No mask, no child custody. COVID-19 is a new factor in family law. Now, one more point before I get to the text of the story. You'll notice that Chris and I actually use different delineating points in which excuse is used to deny someone access to their children. Chris said that it was sometimes people who didn't believe. It was a problem of belief. If I've seen some Facebook post of my baby daddy saying, "Oh yeah, this thing about the virus hoax is nonsense," well then I can show that to a judge, and I can say that he might be irresponsible with my child's safety. But there's even a more benign version of this, where if I have a job where I'm exposed, your spouse could use that as an excuse to keep your child from you. It could be that you're doing your best, that you believe more or less in the government line, but for some reason your job entails. And you know what? We saw this with frontline healthcare workers early on in this crisis. And if the virus was a significant enough threat to justify this, you could just go, well, that's unfortunate. But there were nurses who were denied access to their children in joint custody situations because they were nurses, because that alone represented a unique risk. So welcome back, Chris. Let me just read a couple lines from this story and then get your comments. Melanie Joseph wants to see her son, but a judge won't let her for no reason except that she won't wear a mask. Joseph's 14-year-old son has asthma, a condition that could put him at risk of contracting COVID-19 during this pandemic. Court filings show Broward Circuit Judge Dale Cohen called the mother an anti-mask person who had the audacity to brag about it on Facebook. Conservatives take issue with the decision, but it illustrates how judges in family court now must consider the health risks of COVID-19 on top of juggling the interests of feuding ex-spouses, single parents, and reluctant child support payers. Chris, I don't know if you predicted this precisely, but I think you get a big told you so today.
Yeah. I mean, any excuse that they can use, and the new weapon that's being used on societies is health, safety, and and the line that we always hear, either our best interest or the child's best interest, determined by the government based on whatever scenario they're trying to share with us. If the government and the judges and the courts and all these people were really worried about the best interest of our children, then equal shared parenting would be the norm. Then we wouldn't be serving them soft drinks and chicken nuggets from McDonald's. Then we wouldn't have obese children at the age of 7 or 8 years old. That is child abuse. You see parents walking around, no one's stealing kids away. Typically it's a lifestyle environment thing, where these kids are obese, morbidly obese as children. No one's taking kids away for that. These kids stand a greater health risk of some of the foods they eat, the drinks they drink, and not having equal access to their parent. We know statistically is abuse. So the constant excuse to just give them, these powers, emergency powers. Well, let's just create an emergency and then we'll take the power. That's all that's happening.
Yeah, and of course, I appreciate you bringing that perspective to this. Something we try to do a lot with Adam versus the Man is to zoom out, because one of the worst ways in which we are manipulated is by misdirection and bringing attention to these greater, I guess, cultural. Is obesity cultural when it's promoted by government policy? Kind of. I don't know if I want to call that cultural, but I want to get to a couple more parts of the story here and get your take on these. And this story goes on to detail the way this started, first with a surgeon, and then there were other cases with healthcare workers, and then that came to and a lot of those people were able to fight it and to win and say, look, I'm a nurse, but compared to my spouse, because of my extreme PPE and my safety precautions, I'm at no less risk. I shouldn't be denied rights. But then it came to include, especially anybody who verbally or on social media especially asserted that they weren't going to adhere to the highest standard, whatever the heck that is today, as opposed to yesterday or last week. But this is about a particular case. The judge said in-person visits would have to be supervised because he doesn't trust Joseph, 43, to wear a mask, and he would not consider a long-distance parenting plan, which outlines each parent's rights when they don't live in the same state, between Joseph and her son until the COVID crisis is passed.
So these judges are educated in pre-crime and pre-abuse and pre-exposure to disease.
Yeah. Now hold on. You're going to see. Hold on. It's going to come to your bigger point in a second here. Here's the quote from the judge: "When this pandemic is over and there's no cases and there's a vaccine, the mother is going to need to get a vaccine as well.
Yeah.
When I have proof that everybody's safe and the child's not at risk or danger, then we can talk about a long distance parenting plan. Now, before we go to Chris, I want to share there's a quote in the story from my friend Toe Bishop, and that's Tho, T H O, editor at the Mises Institute. He says, "You see them using opinion grounded in science to justify government outreach. They far overstep the justified power of their office under the premise that we're in this emergency." By the way, opinion grounded in science isn't science.
For
Uh,
government overreach, yeah.
and and they're using this as the excuse. Chris, knowing what you know about family court and family law judges, how much does this not surprise you?
It's just an excuse to control, manipulate, and profit. They don't. Civil courts are charging parents for criminal activity that never gets seen in a criminal court, which means a judge can keep you from your kids without you being charged with anything or having committed a violent crime or put your child in danger. But they will allow you to be around anyone else's children. You can be the best stepdad after they've stolen your own children. Or you could impregnate another woman. Hopefully, this one's not willing to steal your kids for profit and child support payments. But it really just shows the absurdity in the level of granted authority by these family courts that basically let them dictate the law and even outside of our constitutional rights because they wear a robe, or as CJ likes to say, a black dress, and sit on a throne or a bench, as it is referred to it, and they abuse the law. They don't protect the law. They don't protect the people. They make their own decisions based on their best interest or the state's best interest when it comes to profit. And if you as a parent stand up for your rights and you assert yourself as a father and as a citizen of this country, you will be abused by these authoritarian judges who are basically insecure human beings in a position of power.
Now, Chris, there's another. By the way, this person I've been referring to as Joseph is the mother. Joseph is the last name. And one of the things is she was at her oral surgeon's office and took and this was in June, took a picture, a selfie, caption "No mask for this girl." And at the time, there was no mask mandate in North Carolina. Now, she accused the judge of letting his personal political views cloud his judgment in the case.
Yeah,
Now, I don't know about that. I mean, personal political views could just be, I'm the authority, give me more power, I'll take any excuse. I wouldn't consider that personal political views. But she also said, quote, "My case has been in the court system for a number of years, and I have experience with court proceedings. What occurred is unconstitutional and
right,
should never happen to a parent."
right,
And this is one of the things that I want to point out, that you have done a great job of raising awareness for the unconstitutional nature of family courts, the lack of due process, the arbitrary power of the judge. And a lot of this comes from marriage licenses. Is that
right.
when you get married, you are actually inviting the government. CJ, thank you for highlighting. I was about to read that. You're like, oh my God, CJ is like really like he knows me so well. He's
Yeah,
he's a step ahead of my brain for 2 hours a day. It's crazy. But no, I want to point out this first, that the judges have in family courts this insane arbitrary authority because your marriage certificate is a contract where you have invited the government as a third party into your relationship.
right,
And as a libertarian, I'm against government having anything to do with marriage. It was originally a racist institution as a legal institution to prevent interracial marriage. if not, well, at least, and did significantly limit it. But as a way for government to have that power in your lives, in your relationship, that's what it's used for now. And that's how they get away with a lot of this legal stuff, creating family law courts that don't have to respect legal precedent, that are consider themselves operating outside of constitutional legal bounds. And this has been true for a long time. And CJ, back to the highlight. This was the last part of the story. And Chris, I know this is one of the major frustrations you face in your situation as a single father, but for anybody dealing with family law courts, judges are not permitted to discuss their ongoing cases. That was the last line in the article, as if, yeah, we would have reached out to the judge for comment, but we know that they're basically black boxes and black robes who have no obligation to justify their opinions, can stand behind the bench, behind that authority of government, and as you said, sit on a throne. So,
Right.
Chris, uh, given that you predicted this, and I don't expect you to be able to make the bigger call because I can't in terms of where we are going with the momentum of this crisis. But in terms of family law, where do you see this going? And do you have any advice for anybody dealing with any family law situations right
You know, you can see the trend in divorce rates at 50%. You can see the trend in children being born out of wedlock, which is around 40% now. And basically, from my viewpoint, is I'm seeing that there's an increase in creating dysfunction, which is also an increase in creating divorce rates, which, as you said, in marriage, that gives government license to um, basically incentivize a financial battle. And then not only are we dividing up assets, but you're having to hire attorneys. You're forcibly having to hire attorneys, and they may say, "Oh, well, you can represent yourself." But let me tell you this: they're not gonna even look at you or treat you as a human being unless you pay for an attorney. On top of that, if you are smart enough not to get married or government married, to where your assets are then divided up, now they're incentivizing custody battles, which is basically child support is basically alimony. It's just a different name for something, where typically the father, I don't say typically, all the time, the father is usually the one that has to fight for his custody rights out of having children out of wedlock. Now, the state states that parents have equal rights, yet it's extremely clear that those rights are not protected, which forces the incentivized court battle, which causes long litigation, which causes bankruptcies, which causes the use of the best interest of the child. Creating two broke parents to fight over their kids is not in the best interest of any child. And then what happens is now that child's forcibly being raised in a broken, financially, emotionally bankrupted home, and is more likely to recreate that scenario where the courts will profit than in the future. It's a cottage industry. They profit off broken families. And the reason America is suffering today, which is why I want, if not me, you, Adam, and people like Cash Jackson and um, you know, other libertarians to bring up this issue as a major issue on their platform. Spike Cohen has done a great job recognizing this issue. I wish Joe would have taken it more in her campaign to the forefront, but 2024 is coming. And I know you're running, and I may be running for something too. And I know Cash is running. And I really think that libertarians should adopt this core root issue, which creates so many systemic issues that we talk about. Instead of talking about the right to do drugs and the right to sex work, why don't we talk about the fact that if we heal broken families,
maybe less people will want to do drugs. Maybe less people will want to do sex work. Maybe young girls who grew up with strong father figures might not want to sell their bodies. Now, that's
Yeah.
your option if you want to, but why don't we create healthier people instead of advocating for rights for people to do unhealthy things? That's all I'm saying as a
Well,
father.
yeah, well, I would caution to judge what is healthy or unhealthy for someone else, but
Sure.
I certainly agree with your sentiment, and I think it's very important for libertarians to focus more on what matters to people day to day. And I mean, I would quote James Carville, right? It's the economy, stupid. It's people being
Right.
deprived. I mean, yes, there are these deeper health and spiritual issues that go along with that. I don't mean to discount that, but when you look at government, it's you got to acknowledge the theft and all the consequences of that
Right.
result in so many other problems. But Chris, I gotta say thanks for joining us today. But we have one last question from producer CJ,
Sure.
and this is something that came up especially in my presidential campaign, talking about getting rid of the federal government. CJ would like to know, what do you say to people who say this is not a federal issue?
You know, it's basically like saying that alcoholism or the abundance of alcohol use has nothing to do with heart disease. It is at the root of it. The federal government incentivizes the states and the state courts and the child support agencies to to limit parental rights and limit child access and parental access to justify the child support orders, which are also pretty much welfare recovery programs. So, what they do is anyone who's on welfare, um, they typically side with that parent because they're on welfare programs. Well, the state takes the financially fit parent to pay child support, finding them unfit without due process. And that feeds the welfare programs and also those who work in the these welfare programs and state agencies. So basically all the bonus structure and funding and salaries that are being paid for is paid through largely through child support payments, and that parent who is accepting welfare or state funding, whether it be Medicaid or anything like that, signs over, I believe, and I think this isn't it could be in every state. So don't quote me on it, but this is the information that I've heard is that they're signing over, and a percentage of the child support that's being paid by the non-custodial parent is going back into the state.
Mm-hmm.
And how that's delegated and regulated and handed out percentage wise, I do not know. I just know that there's matching funds for child support enforcement, which is not encouraging the best interest of the child, which is not encouraging parental rights.
Well, thank you for joining us today, last minute, and for helping cover this issue, Chris. Greatly appreciate your time.
Adam,
So,
thank you as always.
so one last point I just have to make about this story before we get to our patient guest here. Uh, the way that most Americans think of issues with family law, with child custody, divorces, they think of them as issues with local judges. They think of them as state by state issues, perhaps. And there is significant variation state by state because there are these state agencies. And we talking about this as as political analysts even have a hard time with the acronyms because every state has a different agency with a different name. Now, so yeah, some of them are the same. There's a lot that are CPS, Child Protective Services, DCF, Department of Children and Families. There are a handful of others that they use in different states. And you think that these agencies are acting independently and somehow are a product of just the state government or the community, or well, this is how we deal with these issues. And of course we could do better, but the unfortunate nature of how America does divorces and family law, that's just kind of how things are. And that seems like a very moderate truth. And in a way, I have to apologize to everybody who listened to Adam versus the Man prior to this iteration. Because in the past, I had kind of accepted that moderate truth. And I wasn't lying. I didn't come up with that. But I was unwittingly passing on a moderation version of the truth, or moderated or moderate version of the truth. And as Chris Cole and any honest examination of family law points out, as his group, Victims of Family Law, and others in that realm doing so much great work. But Chris in particular is pointing out that there is an extreme truth behind this, that there is federal involvement, that this is not organic, that this is an extremely dangerous, destructive sub-racket of government policy that destroys lives, that destroys families, that significantly reduces quality of life for tens of millions of Americans directly and everyone else indirectly. And I say this myself as a child of divorce, to be able to step back and recognize, oh, that wasn't just a bad thing that happened. Yeah, we can blame that on government too. And we really have to acknowledge the extreme truth of the state of family law in America.